came through the graduate program here, and I initially started in the financial and commercial analysis team. That team is responsible for essentially the commercial assessment of all the transactions that go on in the company. So that not limited to this list, but off the top of my head, there's order book placements, there's sale and leasebacks with airlines, there's roll-off transactions, there's trading activity we would have with our third-party lessors or financiers, including buying and selling of aircraft, all of our dealings with OEMs. So really, it's a fantastic team, and it was a fantastic area to learn from, because you indirectly touch really upon every single type of transaction you could possibly do within aviation, or within leasing, and from the financial side of it. So I spent 2 years there. I'm final year SMBC Aviation Capital, where I currently work. They came and they did a talk in DCU, and it was kind of one of these open days, and people had stalls, and we were walking around, and we kind of stumbled upon SMBC Aviation Capital stall, me and a couple of friends, and they kind of say, yeah, look, like, okay, this sounds interesting. They said we're doing a talk later on today in your campus. So I went along, met a couple of people who still work in the company and I'm good friends with now, came in. Obviously, I didn't know them at the time, but they came in and they spoke and they told us about the industry and how, I think to people who might be listening to this interview are probably well aware of it, but to me it was a little bit of an unknown, and to a lot of people it does seem it's a bit of an industry not many people are aware of, given the size and scale of it. But they came in, gave us a talk, and I was kind of like, wow, that sounds incredibly interesting. And from that day, I was like, okay, look, I'm going to apply. So I started in the graduate program in SMBC. I'm still here now. So fell into aviation, but I'm very happy that fall was, I don't know if it was pushed upon me or if I kind of volunteered it myself, but like it's all worked out well. So, but yeah, that's how I ended up here. You join for 2 years initially, and you will spend the full 2 years in your one area, wherever you're assigned to. And how you end up in that area, it's there's probably threefold. There's one where the business has requirements clearly. There's two in which the business will assess your interests, and I suppose where they think you're best suited for your skills. And then three, two and three, I suppose, are combined in that you will say your interests, and then three, the company will make their own assessment of your interests and skills. In terms of the graduate program itself, the company, and rightly so, I think, puts an awful lot of emphasis on the graduate program, and then the caliber of people that it tends to attract are generally highly kind of skilled and interested and motivated people. And as a result of that, the company will then put actual responsibility and work onto you. So I suppose the industry itself is a little bit smaller, so you could go to a larger firm where you might start with a couple of 100 people, and it's going to be kind of quite hard to stand out from that. But if you're starting in leasing or SMBC, when I started, it was 6 of us that started, and you really get a lot of kind of responsibility and spotlight from that, and it can be challenging at times because you're joining a whole new industry and it's a lot of people's first jobs and you don't really know what you're doing at the start. But you really learn at a rapid pace, and you get to touch on so many different areas and work with so many different people. Because of that, it's really beneficial in the long run. And I can't speak highly enough of the 2 years and the grounding it gave me. The program itself is just really beneficial, and the exposure and the work you get, it just accelerates your learning, I suppose, and you can take lots of that into your future career. When I was in college and I was studying actuarial and financial maths, a lot of the modules themselves are, off the top of my head, I have financial engineering, financial modeling, macro and microeconomics. And all of these courses and modules that you will study in university or college give you an extremely good grounding in the basis knowledge and the theories behind how these things work. And leasing in aviation is heavily dependent on these factors. Financial modeling, of course, for all the transactions you may or may not do. But the industry, much like leasing is a large financial institution. A lot of leasing companies are like this. And much like other financial institutions, a la your banks in New York or wherever, private equity or hedge funds, it's all extremely tied to the macro environments which you operate in. So having a knowledge of these areas is really key and paramount to doing and performing our job effectively. Aviation is so susceptible to the macro environments. It really is hugely tied to it. So being aware of this is really key to enable us to do our jobs efficiently. The kind of modules I studied, and again, this would relate to law or engineering, any of them, but especially maths. A lot of it is quite logic driven, but it's about breaking it down and saying, okay, what does this clause actually meant to do? If this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And my university, the degree in TCU, it was a great grounding in that. That's why I think the course I did, especially, but also other courses which are similar, are really good grounding to potentially work in aviation or leasing as a career. Not soon after I started in aviation was obviously the onset of the pandemic, and this brought aviation clearly to a standstill. And it was probably the most effective of really any industry in the world. So for someone who wasn't long in the door of aviation and still getting used to it, this was, it was quite the experience. When the pandemic first happened, and certainly the first few months of it, and obviously air traffic went to a standstill, people used to just reach out to me and say, you must be doing nothing at the minute. You have nothing to do. Do you still have a job? Everything like this. And the analogy I used to use at this point in time to try and explain it to people was, not that we're even close to this, but like if you think of a firefighter is busiest when things are going wrong, and that's when they're busiest. And in the good times, they're hopefully not as busy. And aviation was quite similar to that throughout the pandemic, because everything was brought to a standstill. Things were just, everything was going wrong. And at this point, we were essentially firefighting, certainly from a leasing perspective, because you suddenly have a fleet of, 500 aircraft across the globe, and every one of them is grounded. And you are now, there's meant to be rent being paid on these assets, or, certainly you're now trying to firefight and deal with all of these, customers who are basically coming to you and rightly so, we cannot pay our leases anymore because, we're not flying people, we're not making money. And it was trying to, try and deal with these issues. So yeah, look, I started off, and this happened not soon after I started. And of course, look, then from a personal perspective, same as everybody, there was the fact that everybody was now at home, and we weren't working in an office. So my biggest challenge was the fact, I wasn't long in the door. I'm now working from home. On a personal perspective, isolated from people, but isolated from people in the office. And we're now as busy as we've ever been, with more likely being busier than we've ever been. And also, like, the nature of the work certainly took a step up, because the work initially probably would have been, slowly getting into industry and looking at new business and new aircraft and analyzing deals. But as I said, we're now looking at, okay, a restructuring with X customer with 25 aircraft. And how is this going to impact our, financial accounts if they can't pay, and what can we do with them? And, they might have an engine here, we need to repatriate engines, and the analysis took a whole other step up as well. So, look, I think undoubtedly the whole pandemic period was the biggest challenge I faced early on in my career. But having said at the start, I think most people would say the pandemic was probably the biggest challenge they faced in their career. So, like, looking back on it now we're seen to be hopefully past it, and it seems to be in the rear mirror. It was invaluable experience, and having that behind you at an early stage in your career is extremely beneficial, because I've seen and come up and learned in aviation at possibly its worst point, whereas a lot of people who worked in the industry probably only saw it up to that point, probably only seen the good times where air traffic was continuously going up, yields were going up, airlines were getting more profitable, and in that environment, the job's not easier, but it's good stuff you're talking about. But then it obviously changed to not so good stuff. So having that experience, behind me is really, really invaluable looking back. But it was definitely a challenge at the start. But like I said, we're hopefully through it now, and touch this wooden desk in front of me, nothing like it ever happens again. So from a work and a personal perspective. As I said, I started initially in the financial and commercial analysis team, which was responsible for financial responsible for the financial evaluation of all transactions. So I worked there for 3 years, or a little under 3 years, and that gave me an incredible grounding in asset financing and returns and profitability, and how essentially to maximize value out of an aircraft asset throughout its life cycle. My second job then was I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work in the team within SMBC called Commercial Negotiation and Execution, and that team is responsible for essentially all the documentation related to any leasing business or aviation business we undertook. So that, including not limited to lease agreements, sale agreements, novations, which is the act of selling an aircraft with third party acquisitions, OEM communication, documentation, aircraft deliveries. So any aircraft deliveries, and ensuring all documentation is in place for that. So I then worked in that team for roughly or a little over a year. And that was, again, an incredible grounding and introduction to the documentation space of leasing, which is extremely vast. And I only probably touched on the surface of it, but it was a really good introduction. And where I currently work now is in the PRM team in SMBC. So PRM stands for Portfolio Risk Management. And the portfolio risk management team is responsible for, as you might guess, but essentially monitoring all risks across our portfolio and working to ensure those risks are minimized and mitigated as much as possible. And there's multiple risks you can look at across, the aviation space, but I suppose you can look at geopolitical risk, jurisdiction risk, macro economic risk, credit risk, obviously. There's asset risk on the types of assets you might do business on. So that's the remit of the portfolio risk management team. And I suppose that's my current role. And it is actually a newly formed team within AC, which is incredibly exciting, because within a new team, when it's been newly established, there's the opportunity to really grab the bull by the horns and make of the role what you will, because it hasn't been really established and traditional. The PRM team, I suppose, is an amalgamation of two existing teams, which was risk and restructuring. They now fall under the one hat of PRM. But look, the team's newly formed, and what I most enjoy about the role currently is, as I said, it's a new team, and there's really kind of the scope of it is extremely vast and wide at the minute, and it's the opportunity to try and bring that scope and put my own flavor on it, or put the team's own flavor on it. So I would say, like, there's multiple objectives, but I suppose the three key objectives of the PRM team are, like, as I said, it's really to optimize the portfolio, looking at portfolio returns. There's number two, which is, as I said, to mitigate and minimize risk as much as possible. And then three, which is really probably the most enjoyable thing, is performing the necessary research to be able to advise upon the first 2 points. So to advise upon areas where we think we should increase or potentially decrease our exposure. And you can look at that on an airline basis or a country basis, and you can extend it the whole way up to look at airline, country, jurisdiction, region, and then eventually you're looking at the full portfolio across the globe. And to be able to do that job effectively, as you can imagine, giving all the different risk areas you can potentially look at, there's a wide variety of areas you need to touch on. And it's being able to perform that analysis and make the recommendations to the business as to where we think we should be essentially performing those two main directives is something like I'm finding incredibly fascinating at the minute, and I know the team is as well. And it's really exciting to be part of a newly formed team, and certainly our role within the business is becoming increasingly important, because the aviation industry is expanding and getting, it's growing at a significant pace. And certainly leasing, one of the famous stats that people talk about leasing is now essentially over 50% of the commercial aircraft fleet is leasing, which 5 years ago that was probably down about 43%. So that number is leasing. There's probably different schools of thought, but there's probably a natural limit or roof on that number. That leasing, it will probably never be 100. It might not hit 80, but the number is increasing. There's probably a natural limit, but the aviation industry is growing, and if you maintain a consistent percentage on a growing fleet, leasing by definition is then growing as well. and being able to be a part of that, and then try and advise as to where the business should be growing is look, it's an incredibly exciting job to be in. The first point I would probably address here, and I don't think this will be a problem, again, given the audience that might be listening to this, but it's having interest, because as I've said multiple times here, the aviation industry or leasing industry is so wide and the scope of it is massive. There are numerous areas you can have an interest in, or you might find your niche, or where you would like to, where you'd like to seek a career. But just having that interest and showing that genuine interest, it's really apparent, and it really shows when people are coming into the industry, the people who are genuinely interested in it and want to learn. And the people who work in aviation, are some of the most talented and bright people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And people are more than happy to share their experiences with you. So just really have, look, again, it's probably a given for this audience, but just having an interest is incredibly important, and it really shows, I think, when people are coming in new into the industry. Number two, what I would say, and it's kind of just on the back of having an interest, but it's probably just a different word for it, to be honest, but I was going to say be curious. And by be curious, I mean, if you're working in aviation, certainly early in your career, or you come across something, start to pull that thread, for lack of a better phrase, and start to maybe question why that certain thing is like this. So it could be anything, off the top of my head, you might look at an asset valuation. So you could have an aircraft that, might not be a core aircraft for a certain airline, a part of their strategy, and its valuation might be, seem significantly lower to another asset's valuation, whether that's a proprietary valuation or third-party appraiser valuations. But you might make your deduction, okay, this asset is starting to see an increase in lift, much more airlines are starting to utilize it, but the valuation is not growing. And be curious and start to pull that thread and see if the evidence is there to back up your assertion that maybe the valuation should be higher. And just look, be curious and question things. I think it's just invaluable. And look, people I've worked with and people I've seen come through and things like this, having that question, or like that quizzical kind of attitude is really beneficial, and it really comes across. It really comes across very well. And the third thing, which is again just another variation on the first two, but I suppose I'm really hammering it home because I really think it is the most important thing, is just ask, because you will undoubtedly have, and I still have, and I think you ask CEOs of leasing companies or aviation companies, they will still have as many questions as they probably had on the first day they started. And the reason for that is the industry is continuously evolving. So no one can ever know all the answers because it's constantly a shifting beast. But just ask questions, because there is so much to learn. The scope is so wide. You cannot, the famous phrase about everything is every day is a school day. Every day is a school day if you're working in aviation, because it does change so much, and just be continuously asking questions. So I think the three things I've outlined there are really all three variations of the same thing. But as I said, I think it's just important to, I think in my opinion, that really is a key, for students looking to pursue a career. Just try and bring that mindset into it. And it'll lend you certainly well in the short term, but especially in the long term. Because having that attitude of being able to say, put your hand up and say, I don't know the answer to this, but let me ask this person beside me who's been here 15 years, or this person in this other team who's been here 25 years, they might know the answer. And vice versa, because it's changing so much, you will probably know something they don't know, because you might have worked on a project that is just now at the forefront. But that, in a nutshell, is the advice I would say, is just have that curious and quizzical nature, and just ask questions, and always be open to learning more. I think it's very important to be a critical and logical thinker, and having, been able to think about all pieces of the puzzle and how they all feed and interact with each other is really important, because aviation and leasing, it's a transactional business, but within those transactions, there can be 10, 12, 20, 30 different elements that are feeding off each other. and very much generally it's about striking a balance between all of those, because you can say I won't give it specific examples, but if you had like, X factor and Y factor, you could say, okay, I need as much X factor as possible, but that's going to reduce your Y factor, and you would also need as much Y factor as possible. So it's about finding that balance, and having that critical and kind of logical mindset and way of thinking about things, and being able to consider all of those factors and see, okay, this is the optimal outcome. I think is really important. So just being able to think about all pieces of the puzzle and how they feed and play off each other, is extremely valuable. And a third thing probably springing to mind, and I don't know if this is a skill or a trade, it's probably a little bit of both, but it's to be flexible. So again, I've mentioned multiple times about how wide the aviation industry is. Being flexible and being open to work in any of those areas it's really important, because again, going back to point two, every area feeds off each other, and the more exposure you can get in every other area will obviously benefit you in that said area, but it will benefit you nearly more in its interactions with other areas. So, if you think of, three teams off the top of my head, we have our financial and commercial analysis team, we have our risk management team, and then, we might have our marketing team. And if you have exposure in financial and commercial analysis, okay, you can bring that into your risk management, and that can help you do your risk reward, not exact calculation, but a risk reward, cost benefit analysis or something like this. And then, okay, risk, you can then say, okay, that's how we're pricing the transaction, that's what we're getting. You can then look across the market and say, okay, what's the market getting? What's this airline's secured, unsecured debt being priced at? Are we getting appropriate reward for our risk? And then you can look, if you've worked in those two areas, you can then bring, if you're then, working in a marketing job or something, you can then, you have knowledge of those two areas, and you can say, okay, is this transaction something I want to pursue and propose to the business? So being flexible and being open to work in different areas, even if you think that area might not be your direct interest, I think is really important, because it's all learnings you can link back, to you, as an individual, and say, I've had experience in X, Y, and Z, so I can look at this transaction from three different angles. And it's just, having been able to see the whole picture is really important. So I would say be flexible. And again, if it's a comment or a job comes up in something you think might not be interested in, it's just beneficial to get that experience at the end of the day, and it will make you a more well-rounded aviation professional. Doing our jobs, we are being kept up to date with the latest development in news. That could be, if I'm, me working in portfolio risk management, I will often be talking to airlines. Then you're getting news directly from the airlines as to how their operations are going, what the trends are in their jurisdiction, shareholder support, everything. You're getting news directly from them. But then, and if we look at our corporate finance team, they'll be having lots of conversation with banks and third-party lenders and financiers, and they'll be seeing the industry from that whole different side of the angle about, new money feeding in, and new capital that might want to increase their exposure in the industry. So they're hearing it directly from them and their summaries and thoughts on the industry. And I suppose within ASC, this is probably ASC specific, but that flow of information is disseminated extremely well. So if our funding team are having a conversation with a bank and they find an interesting piece of news, they'll send it out to the company, so now everybody's aware of this. Similarly, if we're talking to an airline and we find out something interesting that's of relevance to everyone, we'll send it out so everybody's then aware of that. So really, just by, I suppose, our position with the industry and the conversations we are having naturally as a result of that, we really are kind of at the forefront, I suppose, of these developments and news. Several really good online resources to keep up to date. Off the top of my head, Sirium Ascend, which is one of the most well-known appraisers in the industry, they're really good. They've a couple of great analysis pieces, and a couple of really intelligent people work there, and that's a very good source. There's the Air Finance Journal, again, for example, one of the sponsors of the conference weeks we'll have in Dublin and across the globe, and they're really good. And then there's a couple of great initiatives. We have IATA, we have ISTAT, ALI, AWG. These are all, cross, they're departments made up of industry, lessors, but also, MROs and airlines and the leaders of these companies all coming together to discuss. And again, the dissemination of information from those sources is always readily available. So really, it's I would say, if the answer is two reasons. One is, that's what our job is, and it's to keep up to date on news. And two, there's multiple other people, our third party sources, that do really, really good work. And it's always important to probably stay up to date to them, and that's how we get a lot of our developments in the industry. I think it's a really important question, and not just for aviation or leasing, but for any job or industry. It can be quite hard to switch off nowadays because you're always online, and that can extend to work. In which case, and certainly probably COVID, one of the many, I don't know if it's positive or not, but one of the outcomes of COVID was it kind of accelerated that, certainly the work from home angle, but always the people always being online. And I think it's important to not always be online, really, to put it simply. And what I like to do in the evenings, again, personally speaking, is, I have my work phone and my personal phone. I get out of the house, and I'll, permitting, obviously, there are situations where this won't be possible, but work permitting, leave the work phone in the house and just really, cut off your line of communication. So, it's great. It's all well and good going out for a run, but then if you can hear your work phone in the pocket dinging with a Teams message or an Outlook email coming in, you're not really switching off. So I think it's really important to physically cut off that line of communication if possible, and get out for a run and really just have the headspace or time to just shut off and kind of unwind. So that's one thing I like to do, again, if permitting, for a couple of hours in the evening. A good thing about leasing or aviation, and again, I'll preface this with, this is generally the case, is that your weekends are generally your weekends. So there can be a lot of industries where work can bleed into the weekends, and that's probably never an ideal outcome. Again, generally within aviation or leasing, you do have your weekends to yourself, and that's great. You have the time over the weekend to detox, and take a step back, because the weeks are generally very busy, and you can be working quite hard during the week. So it is really nice to have your weekends to yourself and to do, take that me time, for lack of a better phrase. So that's probably the two main things I utilize. Really just, if permitting, use the weekends for yourself, and take a couple of hours in the evening if work permitting, and just cut off that line of communication, so you can really switch off and take some personal downtime. I don't have a specific example for this. I'm not going to say X deal that I worked on was my most, my proudest moment. I think looking back on my career today, what I am generally, happy to have achieved, or I'm lucky to have had the opportunity to have achieved this, but I've managed to get exposure across many different areas in a relatively short period of time within leasing specifically. So like I said, I've worked in the financial commercial analysis side, I've worked in the commercial negotiation and execution side, and I'm now working in the portfolio risk management side. So having had the opportunity to work in three distinct areas, again, in a relatively short period of time, is something I am quite proud of. So I think that's probably the thing I'm most happy to have accomplished so far. Anybody who listens to this, I hope it's of some benefit to some people. I don't have a sign-off message, but what I would say is, I mentioned earlier about how I fell into aviation and people don't tend to leave it. I think there's a reason for that. In that aviation and leasing is an incredibly exciting and ever-changing industry, and there are so many areas you can find your interest and niche. And I just think because of that, it's really, really worthwhile. If you have an interest, pursue it and just put your best foot forward, and you ultimately probably won't regret your decision. And like I said, the lack of people leaving probably points to evidence for that statement. But yeah, look, absolutely, I hope this was helpful to some people, and yeah, thank you for reaching out as well. I appreciate it.